Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. We're learning Maseches Yevamos, Daf Yud Beis. We have 10 blot left, and we have to plan for a siyum. Yes, are we doing a whole animal of some kind? Just let me know. You don't have to answer now, but we'll do something fun. Okay, we're at the very top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph, and we're in the middle of a sugya, and we were talking about a case scenario on the previous page where we had said that if a husband was unavailable to his spouse, to his Yevama, then we force him to do chalitza. So on the top of Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, Ad shekofanos olachlos, before we get to the point of forcing him to do chalitza, nichpenu liyabim, why don't we say that he should do yibum? Tell him to be with his wife, tell him to be with the Yevama. Why are we ending this yibum marriage? So says the Gemara, the reason why is because there was a get involved. He's not allowed to marry her. They already have a halachic divorce. She already got a get. They already had bia and they already had a get, and therefore there is no room for chalitza. Says the Gemara, that's not so simple that this is a case where there was a get. Why? Because Meisvei, there's a Gemara. The Brisa writes, if within the first 30 days that a Yevama is with her Yavam and she claims that there was no Tash Meshamita, so even if he argues, Bein Shu Omer Ba'alti, Bein Shu Omer Lo Ba'alti, no matter what he says, Kofan Asoshiach Lo, no matter what, marriage is over, no room for anything else, they do Chalitza. Now, La'achar Shloshim Yom, if it were to be after 30 days, so if it was 35 days, and then she makes her claim that her husband did not provide her with intimacy, then in that case, mivakshen heimenu l'sheyach lotzla, then we request of him to do chalitza, but we don't force it. He omeres nivalti. If she says that there was tashmish, who omer lo nivalti, he says there was not. Hareze yotzi beget, then that case needs a get. And then this last case is the case that we need. Who omer ba'alti, he says that there was tashmish amita, but he omeres lo nivalti, and she says there was not. Afal pisha chazer ba'amer lo nivalti, even if he goes back and changes his mind and he says, really, you're right, there was no tashmish amita, tzricha get v'chalitza. They need both get and chalitza. So if we see in the seifa that we need get v'chalitza, it implies that there was no get given in the Reisha because we needed it in the Seifa. So it must be that there was nothing in the Reisha. So how can you say in the Reisha that it's a case of get? That was how we answered up the case as to why it is that we force him to do chalitza. Why don't we do yibum? Because there was a get. So the Bryce implies that that's not true, that there was no get in the Reisha.
So why do you need both?
Well, you need both because a get ends a halachic, we'll see in a moment, but the get ends a halachic marriage and chalitza ends a zika. They have different.
Right, but if they're already married, then you need a get. And if they're not already married, then
you still need chalitza if they're
right.
Yeah. What's the question?
So why can't it be one? Why isn't it one or the other?
There are different halachic tethers. One is because you're halachically married, and the other is because of zika. They're not the same thing. You'll see in a moment when. Let's just read the next two answers, and then we'll see. So how does the Gemara respond to this quandary? Rabbi Ami tzricha chalitza im gita. We need both. We need chalitza, and we also need a get. And take a look at Rashi to answer your question. Tzricha get, fourth line down in Rashi, libi aso, because they had tashma shemita, mishum da'amar ba'alti. And then in the next Rashi, v'chalitza mishum da'havia shavisa l'nafsha chaticha de'isura. This is a concept, shavia nafsha l'chaticha de'isura is a concept we find by kashrus. That there's a piece of meat that we have a halachic status of isra, and here it's being applied by a person by saying that lo nivalti, that our relationship is basically over. She made herself a chaticha de isura as with a zika, and that requires chalitza to remove it. And Rav Ashi says the two gittin are very different. Rav Ashi says, Omar, hasam get lezikaso, hacha get lebiaso. And this was the distinction text that I was making to you earlier, that the gittin have different impacts. There's a get, which is called chalitza as it relates to the zika, and then there's a get, which is for bia, which is for regular marriage. And the Gemara tells a story about this. Hanhu shnehem modim da'asu l'kamei derabba. There were two people, husband and wife, Yavam and Yevama, who agreed that in fact it was the case that they had not been together, and they went to go talk to Rava. Amar lehu Rava chalutzula. He says to the man, just give her a chalitza, v'shar l'tigra, and let her go out to the market. Fine. Amar le Rav Shiravia l'Rabba. He says, hold on one second. V'tanya tzricha get v'chalitza. We just learned a few lines ago that there needs to be a get v'chalitza. Amar le Tanya, you're right. If in fact there's a brisa that says you don't only need chalitza, but you also need a get, so then yeah, you're right. You taka need both. It's amazing to watch these moments in history where by us we're like, yeah, I need to get a chalitza. And Rava's like, I only think chalitza. And someone's like, wait, there you missed a brisa. Like this kind of like the growing of our brisa pool, which is it's a very cool thing to see. And that's what the Gemara says over here, is that Rava just found out about this brisa, and therefore he agreed that in a case where the husband and wife, the Yavam and the Yevama, had not been together, that in fact they need to have a get and chalitza. Halfway down on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, Ba'aminei hon bereder Rav Nachman mid Rav Nachman. He named his son Hon. Rav Nachman named his son Hon, and his son had a question. So Rasa Mahu, what about the wife, the co-wife in this particular case? So the wife is the Yevama is married, and she's the one who hasn't had tashmish with her husband. What about her tzara? The Gemara says it's enough. We don't have to make the tzara's life any more complicated. By virtue of the fact that we're talking about being kofa the baal to do chalitza and or mivakshin, whatever the case may be, we're not going to be extra strict on the tzara. Okay. What about the case of hanoderes hano? We spoke about this already. The case of a woman who's noderes hana from her yavam and or her husband. We'll see a little bit more what was going on there. Let's learn a fascinating brisa. It's actually a mishnah. Tnan Hasam, the mishnah writes, this is a mishnah in Maseches Nedarim. The Rishona initially, we'll soon see in the brisa that it was changed, but initially, that 3 women can leave their marriage and they still collect a ksuba. A woman who says to her husband, I have become tameh. Rashi highlights over here that we're talking about a case of an Eshes Kohen who says that she was violated, that she was raped. And of course, and one of the most complex halach, not complex in intellect, but a bitter pill to swallow, is that if in fact an Eshes Kohen is violated, then the marriage is over. So if she says to her husband, Tmei anilach, then she's yotzas v'nodlas ksuba. She has to get divorced, but she also does collect her ksuba. Next case, hashamayim beini leveinach. Only the heaven knows what's going on between me and you. In other words, this is code word for the husband is not fulfilling his mitzvah of ona. He's not available to her for tashmish shamita. She too is yotzos v'nodlos ksuba. She gets to leave her marriage and collects the ksuba. And netula ani min haYehudim. And this woman, netula ani, means I'm removing myself from the Jews. Rashi here highlights that we're talking about a case where the tashmish shamita was so incredibly painful for her that she kind of made a lashon shvua that she never wants to be with another Jew. Very strong language, and in all 3 of these cases, they're yosos v'nodlos ksuba. However, the Chachamim were concerned about these 3 cases. Chazru lomar shelo tehi isha nosenes einah ba'achar mekalkelas al baila. These 3 cases are so easy for a person to claim to get her out of the marriage, and she gets the ksuba. It was almost like a get out of jail free card, and it was so easy. The Chachamim were concerned that if a woman was attracted to another man and wanted to end her marriage, no problem, I was violated. So easy to get out of the marriage. No problem, you don't sleep with me anyways. No problem, whatever the 3 cases are. So therefore, the Chachamim had to add in some checks and balances. What were the checks and balances? 2/3 of the way down. Chazru lomar, here's what they changed. The next line, Ella, how meres tmeya anilach, if a woman says to her husband who's a Kohen that I'm tmeya, in other words, that she was violated, tavi raya l'dvareh. She has to bring a raya that she was violated. Not the best thing to say to a rape victim, but it is in fact the requirement in halacha. The standard at which she would be allowed to be yotzos with her ksuba is only if she can prove that there was a violation. Otherwise, we're afraid that there's a ha'arama, that she's trying to pull the wool over his eyes. Hashamayim beini leveinach. What about the case where she said only the heavens can testify what's happening at home between me and you, where he was not available to her? So then the Rav should try and intervene. Yasu derech bakasha. Then he should tell the husband, can you please be available to your spouse, like be a reasonable husband, just to be available to your spouse. That's what the Gemara says that is our intervention over here, but it's not an immediate yotzos with her ksuba. And lastly, if a woman says netula ani min haYehudim, that if a woman excuses herself from all Jewish men, yafer chelko, this husband can undo his portion of her shua, and they can still be together. Now, on that 3rd case, the Gemara is now going to bring us back to Yibum, which is what we were talking about before. In the case of Utahei Netula min haYehudim, when a woman says, I need to remove myself from all Yehudim, remember what Rashi had said earlier, that we're talking about a case where the Tashmish Amita was very uncomfortable for her, ad kedei kach, that she said that she never wants to be with another Jewish man. So, Ibayalahu Netula ani min haYehudim liyavam mahu. This woman is married to Reuven. Rachel is married to Reuven, and the Tashmish Shemitah is so painful. She says out loud, I never want to sleep with another Jew again. So was she being sweeping and including a Yavam, which is someone who never really would have been on her mind? You don't, in a healthy marriage, you don't like pine for your brother-in-law while you're still married to Reuven. You don't pine for Shimon. That's not normal. So the Gemara is saying, do we assume that when she said, Netula min haYehudim, that I want to be removed from all Jewish men, what was the status of the Yavam as it relates to that Shavua? Do we assume that he was included in the limitation, or do we assume that because he's an unreasonable candidate, he is excluded. What's our halachic assumption? Do we assume that she's under the assumption that her husband would die and she'd fall to yibum, to this yavam, without children, or not? Great question. That's again, like, what are the standing assumptions?
The mindset.
What's the mindset?
It seems like a cheat.
Which direction? I don't even know which way.
Well, because the Yavam is still a Yehudi, regardless.
But obviously, you don't have to say, for example, her father. She doesn't have to include her father in the list.
As
Why?
long as she doesn't have children, she always knows that's hanging over it.
The yibum status?
It's not like it obsesses you, but
Yibum you're talking about?
yibum is always hanging over, I suppose, on some level.
But the point is that let's talk about the polar opposites. You have a father on the one side, her father, off limits. She's not thinking about her father. Moav. It's not the way things work. It's not the way things work. So, and then there's the obvious, which is her husband, who she's available to, and she's making a shvua from him. But what about the gray area in the middle, which is yibum? It's a very, very unlikely scenario. It's unlikely in general. It's just, in this case, she's uncomfortable, and she's going to say, "I'm going to usher myself to everyone, including the unlikely statistic chance that I'll marry my brother-in-law."
It says he's still a Yehudi. How she thinks
Her
that-
father's also a Yehudi, but for sure, her father's not part of the shvua.
Of course, but I don't think they're comparable cases.
They're not perfectly comparable, but that's what the Gemara is torn with. Are we saying that the Yavam is similar to a father who is totally off limits, or is the Yavam similar to the husband? Because, like you're saying, it's a theoretical possibility, and he's a regular Jew who's in theory available, assuming that the husband dies and they have no kids. You're right. You're standing right on the nerve. Like, what is the Gemara bothered by? And this is actually Machlokas Rav and Shmuel. Rav Amar Yavam Eino Kabal. Rav says that a Yavam is not like the husband. The husband was obviously meant to be the person, and people like him, to be excluded from Tashmish Hamita. She was now forbidden from her husband to sleep with him again. But Rav says the Yavam is not like the husband. The husband is in the available category, and the Yavam's in the unavailable category. And because of that, she must not have in mind about the Yavam. When she says Netulim Min HaYehudim, the Yavam is not going to be the same as the Baal. Shmuel argues, Shmuel Amar, very similar to you, text, Yavam Hareu Kibal. They're the same. They're the same. He is an available male. He's not available right now, only if Ruvain dies, and only if whatever the perfect storm is. But still, Shmuel holds that she's Yam. Says the Gemara, that can't be that Shmuel's right. Amar Abaye Kavasi de Rab Mistaber. It has to be that Rab is right, that a Yavam is not the same as a Baal. Why? Ditnan, because we have a Mishnah. Hanoderes Hana mi Yavama bechaye baila. Kofen oso shiachlo. It's end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that if a woman makes a neder about Hana, that she will not get any Hana from her Yavam, Shimon, bechaye baila, while Ruvain is still alive, Kofen oso shiachlo. Under those circumstances, we say Kofen. V'im Isa, but had it been the case that a Yavam and the husband were the same, then it should have said, V'im Isa Damaska Daite, that when she said Netula Min HaYehudim, that in fact a husband and a Yavam are the same. If that's true, then it wouldn't have said Kofen, it would have said Mevakshin Mi Boile, and we saw this as a precedent yesterday. So therefore, Rav must be right. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. What was the case we're dealing with? We're talking about a case scenario. She has kids. Shimon would never be on her mind. To kuli hai lo maskadaita, she would never be thinking about that. Says the Gemara, if that's true, then we have a diuk problem. Aval ein la banim mai, had it been that she didn't have children, then mevakshin, then the language of the brisa should have been mevakshin. But if that's true, then adatani im niskavna lakach, if in fact that was her intention, afilu b'chayev baila mevakshin mimeno shiach lotzla, then even in the lifetime of her husband, when Ruvain was still alive, it should have said mevakshin mimeno that we asked. And if that's true, then liflog v'lisni b'dida. That's what it should have said explicitly in the brisa. The brisa should have said bamedvar mamurim. When would this be true? B'shiyesh labanim. Aval ein labanim mevakshin. If she didn't have children, then the language of the brisa should have been mevakshin, but it's not. Elashmami, no, we see that it's like Rav, loshna yesh labanim, loshna ein labanim. It doesn't matter if she has children. Kofen oso kerav shmami, no. We therefore paskin that a yavam is in fact not like the Baal. It's unbelievable. I'm with you. That was my instinct. But what Rav was saying in the end is that when she makes her sweeping comment that Netula ani min HaYehudim, that means that a Yavam is not included. And it kind of paints this picture of what are the statistical likelihoods. And we have these thresholds in halacha called miyut hamatzui and miyut she'eno matzui. Is it halachically usher, just as an example, to not wear a seatbelt? because you're not allowed to do things that are dangerous. So is this dangerous? What are the statistical possibilities? And some of the poskim actually put percentages on miyut she'eino matzui. Yes, it's very unlikely that a seatbelt will save your life. Statistically speaking, it's very unlikely that it will help you one way or the other. Baruch Hashem, most people don't get in car accidents. And Baruch Hashem, if someone, God forbid, does, it's usually not that bad. And what, 1 in a million? That a seatbelt literally, 1 in 100,000, 1 in 500,000? So is that called? So that's where the poskim come in. They say, what is a miyut she'eino matzui? This shiur comes up in regards to bugs all the time. Are you allowed to eat sunflower seeds without checking every single sunflower? It depends. What percentage of them actually have bugs in them? In order to answer that question, you need to open X number of them and check and see how many bugs there are. That's how we check for bugs. So, okay, so these are all shilas in regards to minorities. And over here, we're seeing that Rav was so not concerned about a yavam that even if a woman were to say netula mina Yehudim, that a yavam would not be precluded from that particular relationship.
Why is it like Dr. Yehudim and not Kavarim?
Manaf kamina. Who else can she sleep with? She can't sleep with a guy.
I know, but the Russian restraint to use the word Yehudim. Right, because then it says like, okay, so you know what, I don't want a Jewish man, I'm going to find another one. That's, I mean, you could see a havamina that way.
Rashi says 4 lines before the wide lines, Nadrahi shaloti ba'li Yehudim. What she was doing was basically, as Rashi says, forbidding herself to all men in the world. Already asr to all the goyim. When we do asr nafsha kule alma, shma mina tashmish kashela ve'anuse lefichach notelas ksubasa. She was saying a language.
She was closing up the very last door. So
Correct. I mean, I didn't think about it, but yeah, it's still strange. It's still strange. What does Tosfos say? No, different discussion. I think it's a different discussion because he starts out quoting Rashi, but a different Rashi. So you may recall over the last many days, we saw a lot of braysos. What about a cheresh and a ketana? What about a shote? So all of those very small mishnahs and braysos that we had learned over the last couple of days, every last one of them is collected here in this extremely long mishnah. And that's where we're going to start this new, Hadron Allah Beis Shammai, Baruch Hashem, we finished another parak. We finished parak Beis Shammai, we're starting cheresh shenasa, the 14th parak of this Masechta. Not the last parak, is it? No, 15, 16. There are 16 prakim. We're almost there. All right, so we're going to learn a lot of different cases. This is one of those Gemara, one of those Mishnayos that really needs to be read 15 times just to kind of get all the categories. We're not going to do that. We are going to read through the Mishnah and explain every case. But let's just have a recognition that some of these cases are quite similar to one another. It has an Eruvin feel to it in a way. And so does the rest of the Masechta, frankly. So what?
That's a long Mishnah.
It's a very long Mishnah. Starts at the parak and goes till 6 lines from the bottom of the page. It's very big, and it's a double wide. It's a very long section of Mishnah. Okay, let's go. Cheresh shenasa pikachas upikech shenasa chareshes. If you have a cheresh, a man who is a deaf mute who marries a normal woman, and a normal man who marries a female deaf mute, imratza lahotzi hotzi, he can divorce her. Imratza lakaim yikaim, he can stay in the marriage in both cases. Kshem shu kones biramiza kachu motzi biramiza. Just like one can enter a marriage by whatever signaling system they have as a cheresh, so too they can get out of this. A fascinating tshuva with Rav Moshe Feinstein that came up about a woman, about a man who was in a coma, and he wanted to give his wife a divorce, but he was in a coma. So they started asking him questions, and when the answer was yes, he was able to control his body to the point that the monitors would start, changing his brain activity, whatever it was. He couldn't talk, couldn't move his body, but he was able somehow to control his brain. So when they said, "Do you want to divorce your wife?" the machine, like all the bells, and started going like crazy. So they brought her Moshe Feinstein, and so as the story goes, he walked into the hospital room, and they asked a bunch of questions, and he paskin based on that biramiza, just like this Mishnah, that this man was able to issue a get while being completely unconscious, physically trapped in a coma. He was able to give his wife a divorce to save her from being an aguna, because he could have been in a coma for years. So this is what remiza means. Again, not specifically this, but this is one of the marimakomos that would lead to Rav Moshe's psak. Let's say that a regular man married a regular woman, and then unfortunately she became nischarsha, she became a deaf mute. He can stay with her, and he can also divorce her. Nishtates, however, if she goes to the level of insanity, which is different than, I mean, a cheresh is not insane. A cheresh is, they have a lot of their mental faculties to them. They have communication struggles, but they're not insane. But nishtates lo yoti, that's that because she has no das, she has nothing. That's a shota. Nischaresh hu o nishtate, if he, the husband, became a cheresh and or became insane, eino motzia olam, she's stuck. She's stuck as an aguna because he has no das to divorce her. Totally stuck. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Nur mipnei ma ha'isha shenischarsha yotza ve'ish shenischaresh eno motzi. Why is it that a woman who became nischaresh can be yotza? She can be divorced, but the man cannot make her divorce if he became nischaresh. Amrulo eno dome ha'isha megarish leisha mishkareshes. There's no difference, but there's a big difference between the man who has to cause the divorce and a woman who's the recipient of a get. Sha'isha yotza lirtzona velosh v'shelo ritzono ve'isha eno motzi elo lirtzono. Him, we need his das, we need his kavanah, we need his focus, and he doesn't have any anymore. If he started as a pikech and ended up nischaresh, so that's a big problem. He no longer is able to. That wasn't how he got married, and it's not how she's going to get divorced. So she's stuck. Hey, Rabbi Yochanan ben Gudgida ala chareshes sheisia aviha sheyotza beget. That a chareshes that was married to someone by her father, that she's able to get a get. Amrulo afzu kayotze ba. This is also true in the case that we just learned previously. Says the Gemara, next case, we're 10 lines into the new Mishnah on Kuf Yud Beis Amud Beis. Beis achen charashin. We have two brothers who are charashin, two brothers who are deaf mutes. Nesu and the Beis achayos charashos, and they're married to their equal counterparts, sisters who are also charashos. Oh, or another similar case, l'shtei achayos pikchos, or the two sisters were both regular sisters. Oh, l'shtei achayos achas chareshes v'achas pikachas, or the sisters were either one a deaf mute and one a regular woman. Oh, another iteration, another permutation. Oh, Beis achayos charashos that were nesuos l'shnei achen pikchen. Oh, l'shnei achen charashin. Oh, l'shnei achen echad cheresh ve'echad bikech. In all of these cases, harei elu pturos min achalitza min hayibum, because the women are sisters, and we have a din of achos isha. So whatever, it doesn't matter. Whatever cheir, it doesn't matter. They're sisters, and the fact that they're sisters forces them to always be ptura min achalitza min hayibum. And because if they were sisters, that they were always going to have achos isha. What if they were not sisters? So in all of the previous cases, if they were in fact not related to sisters, then yichnosu, then technically you could marry either of them, and and you can also cause for a divorce. Next, halfway down on the page, shnei achen, echad cheresh ve'echad pikech. You have two brothers. One is a deaf mute and one is a regular person. And nesu, and they're married to shtei achayos pikchos. They're married to two regular women. And now let's talk about a yibum scenario. Meis cheresh bala pikachas. If the cheresh, the deaf mute who is married to the regular woman, dies, what happens to the bala pikachas? Mayase pikech bala pikachas. What happens to the pikech who really should be marrying this bala pikachas? Teitze mishum achos isha. She should be let go because her sister is there. What about meis pikech bala pikachas? What about a case scenario where the pikech dies and he was the husband of the Baal Pikachas, Mayasa Cheresh Baal Pikachas? What about the Cheresh? Can the Cheresh marry the Baal Pikachas B'yibum? Says the Gemara, in such a case, Moti Ishto Beget, Be'eshas Achi Basur L'Olam. His own wife he can divorce, but his brother's wife is never available because of Achos Isha yet again. Next case. Shnei achen pikchen, two brothers who are regular brothers. Nisuan l'shnei achayos achas chareshes v'achas pikachas. One of them is married to a deaf mute, and one of them is married to a regular woman. Meis pikech bal chareshes. If the man who was normal, who was married to the chareshes, died, what happens? Mayasa pikech bal pikachas. What does he do? This pikech does he do to the bal chareshes? Says the Gemara, teitzi mishum achos isha. These cases are actually quite repetitive because when they're sisters, achos isha is in the bag. Of course, that's going to be a problem. Says the Gemara, meis pikech bal pikachas. But if the pikech died, then mayase pikech bal chareshes. Then what will happen with the relationship between the pikech and the bal pikachas? So motzes ishto beget ves eshes achi bechalitza. Next case, shnei achen echad cheresh ve'echad pikech. If you have two brothers, one's a cheresh and one's a bikach, and nisuin l'shtei achayos achas chareshes ve'achas bikachas. One of them is a deaf mute and one of them is a regular woman. Meis cheresh bal chareshes. If the cheresh dies, leaving over the bal chareshes, mayas bikach bal bikachas. The husband of the bal bikachas now has a bal chareshes coming in as a zika. Teitzi mishum achos isha. What about meis bikach bal bikachas? Let's say the regular husband died and his wife was a regular wife. The regular wife falls to the cheresh. Mayas cheresh bal chareshes. The man who's a cheresh, his brother who's married to a chereshes, what will he do with the bal bikachas? It now has a zika to him. Says the Gemara, more than 2/3 of the way down. Motzi es ishto beget ve'eshes achiv asur la'olam. Again, repetitive cases. Shnei achin echad cheresh ve'echad pikach. Two brothers, one's a cheresh and one's a pikach. Nesuin l'shtei nachrios pikchos. Then they're married to two random women who are healthy, normal women. So meis cheresh bal pikachas, mayase pikach bal pikachas. What will the pikach do in regards to the bal pikachas? What about meis pikach bal pikachas? If the pikach died and the bal pikachas was left bezika, mayase cheresh bal pikachas. What will the cheresh do? Can he marry the bal pikachas? Kones ve'eno motzi la'olam. He can marry her, but he can never divorce her. Next case, shnei achen pikchin. Two brothers who are normal, Nisuin lebeis nachrios, and they're married to two random women, achas pikachas ve'achas chareshes. One of them is normal and one of them is a deaf mute. Meis pikach bal chareshes, mayas pikach bal pikachas. If the pikach died, what will the other brother do? Kones v'im ratza lahotziot. He can marry her and or divorce her. Meis pikach bal pikachas. What if the regular husband died? Mayas pikach bal chareshes, or choletz omiyabe. And we're getting to the end of the Mishnah. Let's say that there are two brothers. One is deaf mute and one is regular. And they're married to two random women, one of whom is a chareshes and one of whom is a pikachas. If the cheresh dies, what will happen with the yibum in that case? Says the Gemara, kones, then you can marry in that case. What about meis pikach bal pikachas, mayasa cheresh bal chareshes? What would happen in a case where the pikach died? What can the cheresh marry his wife, his Rachel, who's a bal pikachas? Says the Gemara, kones, yes, but ve'ena motzi la'olam. Says the Gemara, we're going to just wrap up to the top of the page and then we'll stop. Says the Gemara as follows. Let's say you have a marriage of two deaf mutes, male and female. And the rabbis created an infrastructure for which they could get married. And how do we know that when it comes to someone, a man and woman who are insane, we know that this is the case because of the following brisa. Titania shota vikatan, very interesting addition of a word here. A shota and a katan shenasu. Nashim, they married women who mesu neshosem turos mina chalitzu mina yibum. The chachamim don't have a construct for a shota to get married, and seemingly for a katan to get married on his own. We don't seem to have a construct for that. We do for a girl, for a katana, which we'll discuss in a minute, but not for a katan. So says the Gemara, that's what the Brisa writes, and now we have to answer our question, which is, why is it that the chachamim left room for a cheresh and chareshes to get married, but not a shota and shota? Says the Gemara, last of the middle width lines, 5 lines from the bottom, Kufyud Beis Mid Beis, because cheresh v'chareshes tekaima takanta derabanan takin l'rabanan nisuin, because they're able to have a healthy marriage. They're both as knowledgeable as they're ever going to be. They're not going to get brighter. They're not necessarily going to slow down. They're deaf mutes, but they're fine people. They're regular people. I leased a house from someone who was a deaf mute. Okay, that's just what it is. That's just what it was. Totally fine. It was hard to communicate because I don't speak sign language and they read lips. Okay, it worked out. They're regular people. They had a fine marriage, I presume. But a shota v'shota de lo kaima takanta derabanan. Why is it that the rabbis didn't create an infrastructure for two people who were beyond the line? They were shotim. They were insane because they adam darim nachash bekfifa achas. You're not supposed to live in the snake cave. You're not supposed to live in a room, in a house with someone who's going to make everything wrong. You don't marry someone when you know it's going to end badly. You don't share a room with a snake and you don't share a room with a shota. So the Gemara is saying there is no construct for that. Why is it that the katan was included in the brisa? The brisa, which is 6 lines from the bottom of the page, where it says that if a katan was married and died, that his wives are pturas min achalitza, mashna katan delo takinu rabbanan nisuin v'cheres takinu rabbanan nisuin. By a katan, there are scenarios where a katan gets married, but it's not a classical infrastructure where we allow a katan to get married. So, but by a cheresh we do, because cheresh delo asi lechlal nisuin, a cheresh will never reach the level of a nisuin deoraisa. So takinu rabbanan nisuin, they're able to have a functional marriage. But katan da asi lechlal nisuin, because a katan is going to become a gadol at some point, lo takinu rabbanan nisuin, we're not going to come up with this complex structure of giving the katan a chance to get married when he's 9. He'll wait 3 years until he gets married. We see that by a ketana, by a female, that we do have such a construct, that we do allow her to get married. If her father wants to marry her, he can. That's deoraisa. But if her father dies, then the brother and mother can choose to marry off. That's derabanan. The Chachamim did build a construct that's derabanan to allow for a ketana to get married. Says the Gemara, there we needed to do that hasam shelo yinahagu ba minhag hefker. So this is obviously a cultural reference that back in the day, it was considered I guess a scary reality that a young girl could be taken advantage of between the young ages of, being a child up to the age of 12. And because of that, they wanted to have a construct by which she could marry a yid who would take care of her. And albeit it's a rabbinic structure, and really you're right, it should be like a katan, that just like by a katan, we want to wait till he's a bar chiyuva, so we'll wait till he's a gadol, same by a katana. We couldn't say that by a katana because we were concerned about minhag hefker. Last question for the day. Why is it that when it comes to a katana, a young girl, she can do miyun, but when it comes to a chareshes, she could never do miyun? Says the Gemara, de'im kain. If in fact a chareshes was able to do miyun, says the Gemara on the top of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, mimna'e v'lo nasbela. If we would have allowed a chareshes to do miyun, well, her status never changes. She's a chareshes her whole life. So if we would have said that a chareshes can do miyun, she could always do miyun throughout the entire duration of the marriage. Masha'en kain, when we allowed a ketana to do miyun, that was only true up until the age of 12. But once she turned 12, she could no longer do miyun. So if a man was to marry a ketana, he understood that the actual scope of time that a young girl, that a ketana could do miyun, was from the time he married her until the time of her bas mitzvah. Done. Then after that, if there's a divorce, then it's a divorce, but there's no more miyun. A chareshes is not like that. Because the chareshes never reaches a level of das, it is always the case that she can do miyun, and that would prevent people from marrying. We'll stop right here on the top of Kuf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph, wishing you all a beautiful night.
Well,